In 2000, there was still the joke that Jeff Bezos always said, "Oh, I'm going to be the biggest company in the world," and people laughed at him because Sears was the biggest company in the world. Well, now here we are in 2026. Bezos' company is number one. Sears no longer around. So that just goes to show you how much of the shift has happened. And the pandemic obviously facilitated some of that too, accelerated it. And a lot of those behaviors didn't reverse. So we have to operate in that reality.
Yeah. Okay, the Jentry Podcast. I know that you will be loving it. We here to break it down so that you start to understand your local government. Who are the leaders? Time to get active, do something about it. Dealing with jobs, the workforce, and affordable housing. Motivate and inspire. Elevate, take it higher. For the next generation. Knowledge is power for your community. Giving you the info that you really need. Time to make a change and a difference. Tune in, don't miss it. It's the Jentry. The Jentry Podcast. The Jentry Podcast. Making a change, switching it up.
Hello, and welcome to the Jentry Podcast today. We have an incredible guest. I'm your host, Jonathan Mason, and with me I have Will Kolbow, who is the city manager of Calimesa, California. And he's got an incredible background, and I'll save that for him. But a tidbit I like to share is he's also a fellow podcaster. So you can see from the setup and the charisma that he's ready to go. But before we get too far into it, Will, how are you doing today?
I'm great. It's our Friday here, so I'm really good.
I love that. The Friday before the holiday weekend. I can appreciate that. But before we get too far, I have to do as I always do. So what is the secret sauce of Calimesa? What makes it the best place to live in the United States?
It's a rural city that is still close to the city amenities. And so the thing that always stands out for all of our residents is the breathtaking views that we have here. Our biggest landowners in the city are conservation agencies, whether they're public or nonprofits. And so those lands will always be dedicated to open space. And so everyone has access to incredible views, trails, things like that. And I think that's what makes us super special.
That is awesome. That green space, the access to nature is so important. Now, I know we're going to learn a lot about the city, but I always say you learn so much about a place by learning about their leadership. So, Will, did you always know you wanted to get into public service, even from a child? How do we get here? And please take the scenic route.
So, I didn't. So I'm born and raised in Southern California. Only child, and grew up in the South Bay area. So if you're familiar with the LA area, that's, the Redondo Beach, Torrance area, and very normal childhood. I was always good with numbers. I was always good at math. So my path I always thought was going to be through accounting. And that was what kind of my parents encouraged me to do, just because they thought, you're good at math and that's probably something that might come easy to you. And it's a well-paying job. And so that's what you should look into. And so that's what I majored in when I went to college. Now, once I graduated and started working for an accounting firm, I quickly realized that accounting isn't just about math, especially when you're an auditor. Not that I couldn't do it, not that I didn't wasn't good at it, but just wasn't my thing. But the firm that I went to specialized in public agencies. And the first firm I worked at did a lot of cities, some special districts. And that's how I got to know kind of the public sector of things. I didn't know what a city manager was at that time. I was, like a lot of members of the public, they just don't know how a city works. I was exactly in that boat until I started, kind of seeing them from, still from the outside, but starting to get to know more about what they did and how they were structured. And I quickly realized that, my talents may be best used on that side of the table. So as soon as that, I got my experience to get my CPA's license, I went to work for a public agency. So I started working for the Cucamonga Valley Water District as their accounting manager. I was promoted to finance manager, overseeing purchasing. Worked there for about 6 years, and then I wanted to grow in my career, so I went to the City of San Bernardino Water Department, and that was around late 2012. And if you're familiar with the City of San Bernardino, that was right after they had declared Chapter 9 bankruptcy, coming out of the Great Recession. Didn't affect the water department directly as much because in California, there's special laws that, allow you to or require you to actually keep your funding separate for things like water services and things like that. But I had to work to make sure that those funds actually did stay secure and used for the ratepayers, because that's the way we saw it. It was is that the customer's money, and the customer and the taxpayer, that's two different things. Even though they may do both, where they pay when they pay for their water bill, they should expect that money will be used for their water bill. So we did a lot of work to make sure that that was the case. And we had to actually work with the bankruptcy judge to do that. So that was, dog years. I was only there about just a little under 2 years, but it was dog years just because of all those challenges. But something that was very unique and probably, hopefully, something I never have to experience again, to be honest with you. And then I went to the city of Orange after that to become their finance director. Just wanted to, have more experience in the overall part of city government rather than just focusing on one single service. And Orange happened to have a water department, so it still was an element of what I did. But getting that experience obviously got me to see the city operations as a whole: police, fire, parks, libraries. They had it all. And so I kind of worked my way up through the ranks there, became an administrative services director, overseeing IT and HR, which is a very unique thing too. And then eventually assistant city manager. And then about 3.5 years ago, I decided that I wanted to become a city manager, and I applied for the position here in Calimesa, and I was fortunate enough to get it. And I've been doing that ever since. And I will say that the city manager, when you're applying for a city manager position, a lot of times, people want that chair, and it's a lot easier to get it if you already have the experience. But how do you get in the first time? And I think sometimes it's a little bit by chance. So my predecessor here also came up through the finance ranks. She was very popular with the council. She did a lot of great things for the city. And so she was retiring. That's the reason she was leaving. Much to their chagrin, they did not want her to leave. They did not want her to retire. So I had big shoes to fill. But I think that because of my finance background, it really was a good fit for that particular city council. But I've always said, you could have put the same candidates in front of a different council that was maybe looking for something else, and people could have been interviewed the exact same way. They had the exact same experience that they came into in the interview process in Calimesa, and they might have gone in a different direction. I do think once you have that position of city manager, it does help you grow. But getting that first gig is always the hardest, because it just maybe sometimes is it just happened to be what that council's looking for. So that's a little bit about me. On my personal side, I'm a big time bowler. I've been doing that for a good chunk of my life. And so I still bowl once a week in a league. That's about all the time I have with my family life, because I have 3 children and I've been married for 21 years. And so, my kids are my lifeblood, and they're very active in sports. And so the nice thing about Calimesa and the city council is they give me a lot of flexibility to be able to attend those events for my kids. So they're not chaining me to the desk or the office, or you have to be here, 80 hours a week or whatever. They're not like that at all. They're very much like, if you have family stuff, we know you work hard. If you need to take time for off that stuff, they're fine with it. So I'm very blessed to have a city council that allows me to do that, because it's something that's very important to me. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow, I love that. And I appreciate what you said about that first city manager role. I talked to tons of people that bounced around and got denied so many different times. But the way you put it is there is a bit of chance in there, and the preference, since you came through the finance ranks, like the predecessor who had done well came through the finance ranks. And, in a alternate reality, if the predecessor hadn't done well and came through the finance ranks, maybe they wouldn't have been as amenable. So I love that you put that out there, especially for our young viewers that are very interested in a career in public service, and just how that balance and the chance can actually be when it comes to interviewing different places. So thank you for that. But now I want to shift gears into the X's and O's a bit. Can you talk about some of the strategic priorities of Cali Mesa? Not sure if you guys have done a recent comprehensive plan or if it's getting ready to sunset, but I'd love to hear some of the strategic priorities.
Well, it's actually very good timing because we're actively working on our next strategic plan right now. We're at the end of our previous one, and so we're hoping to roll that out, the final version of that, in the next couple of months. So we've been working on it for the last 4 or 5 months or so. And with the consulting firm, we selected Jacob Green and Associates. They've been doing a great job with us. And we had a strategic planning workshop a couple months ago with the city council to get their priorities. We did a community survey, an employee survey, which can give you some interesting results, right? I mean, we didn't get what I would call a statistically relevant sample when we did that, but it does give us some themes of what to look at, and it was consistent with what we kind of already anticipated, which is good. So that means that we're engaged with the community. We kind of get what the community's priorities are, and so there were no big surprises in that survey. So that was nice. That kind of lets us know we're on the right track. But as a growing city, we were incorporated in 1990, and we've had planned growth since day one. When we were incorporated, the county had previously adopted a comprehensive specific plan for the west side of our city, over 7,000 units of residential development, commercial development, mixed use, all of that kind of thing. And we've only seen about 633 residential units out of that development in the last 35 years. There's been iterations of it. It was impacted by the recession of the 90s and then the dot-com boom and bust. And then right as things were starting to pick up again, the Great Recession hit. And so that our project was impacted, never got off the ground. It was actually funded by Lehman Brothers. And so we know what happened with them in 2008. And so it did take a while to get things going, but things are moving again. And so we're kind of at a crossroads, right? We're starting to see, when we incorporated, we had about 6,000, 7,000 residents, and it was an older community. We were a place that people moved to retire. We have a number of mobile home parks that we have seniors that are living in. So it's now we're starting to see more families, and our strategic priorities need to, excuse me, reflect that. And so, our strategic plan is focused on balancing the growth, making sure that, as I talked about at the beginning, with our open space and making sure we preserve that, but understanding what the market needs and how we will be most successful in development, in a mixture of development, right? Not just residential, not just retail, but commercial, even industrial. We have to be mindful of what those market conditions are, because in California, the way the tax structure is built, you have to have that diversity in development. I think that applies anywhere, but especially here because of how property tax grows in Proposition 13. And so residential growth will not cut it, because the proportion of services to how revenue grows will never be the same. And that's why a lot of cities in California are struggling. And so our strategic plan is focusing on that to make sure that we educate the public, number one, of why we're trying to grow the way we grow. And number two, how we facilitate that. So through economic development, public safety, ensuring that we have fiscal stability in our city, that we're fiscally disciplined. So those are the big priorities for us. And the big one for us is economic development. As not just our city is growing, but our region is growing, we want to make sure that we capture some of those tax dollars that are maybe not only losing outside of our city, but also bringing into our city, to make sure that we provide maybe services and products that other cities around us are not, and we can draw those people in to help our tax base and ultimately serve our residents. So that's a big part of where our strategic priorities are lying right now.
Wow, I love that. And a lot of what you said were questions I was going to tease out. So I'm excited to dig into it. But I always say this. So about half of our viewers are municipal leaders or working in municipal government. And then the other half are our interested community members, people that have a love and a respect for public service. So I always ask, could you break down that proposition and how it affects how you lead and how you potentially want more commercial tax base over residential tax base, please?
So I think that, we have to understand, number one, the realities of the market, right? So we've seen the shift from traditional brick and mortar to e-commerce. And so how we thought about and constructed commercial development 20, 30 years ago, maybe when these specific plans were originally adopted, is much different than today. In 2000, there was still the joke that, Jeff Bezos always said, "Oh, I'm going to be the biggest company in the world." And people laughed at him because Sears was the biggest company in the world. Well, now here we are in 2026. Who's laughing now, right? Bezos' company is number one. Sears no longer around. So that just goes to show you how much of the shift has happened. And the pandemic obviously facilitated some of that too, accelerated it. And a lot of those behaviors didn't reverse. So we have to operate in that reality. And so when we're talking about commercial development, yes, sometimes that does mean there's an industrial component to it. But if you plan it the right way, you put it in the right place. Because the other thing that people need to understand about Calimesa is, as much as we love our natural beauty and we do want to preserve that and is very important, we also have a freeway that goes right smack dab through the middle of our city. And it is a major trade corridor. And so if we just need to be realistic and look at ourselves in the mirror and say, look, that is a reality that's never going to change. So why don't we turn that into an economic advantage? And the reality is that industrial development, even if you don't get a fulfillment center which can produce sales tax, it can still bring in tremendous property tax relative to the impacts that it makes. So for example, a industrial development could be have a valuation of hundreds of millions of dollars, which brings in significant property taxes, but it doesn't consume a lot of public safety resources. So we can take some of that money that's being utilized by that, that's coming in from that industrial, and have it serve our residents through public safety because they're not using a lot of those resources. And if we propose the right benefits as these projects come in to secure those benefits for our community, we can minimize those impacts from those developments even more. Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there's not impacts from them. So, in addition to the retail piece of it, people are more looking for experiential retail than they were before. That doesn't produce a lot of sales tax revenue. Actually, in some cases, it produces almost none. And so it can have a public services impact while not producing a lot of revenue, but it's an amenity that our residents enjoy, and that can then draw people in to do other things, dine at restaurants, which does produce sales tax revenue, spend other time here, or just even move here, make our developments, our residential developments more attractive. So all of that has to be part of what you look like. You can't have anything that's off the table, because if you do, you miss opportunities and you end up long term in a situation where your revenues are not keeping up with their expenses. And the only way to do that is either to increase taxes, which nobody wants to talk about, or decrease services, or in some cases, maybe it's even both in extreme cases. So the planning we do today will minimize the risk that happens to us in the future.
I think that's so smart, and that's a great way to look at it. When we start to think of what is the best use and what is the best service to the community, you have to start thinking about the generation of taxes, and then also that balance of services. Like, I love what you said. It's like the industrial park may give us $100 million in worth value of property taxes, but they're not using our public safety resources, so we can utilize those for other people within the community. So I think that is so important to be very strategic about that. Now, one of the things you did bring up, and even with the experiential retail, how that affects your residential. Now, I am going to get this wrong with the number, but I thought I heard you guys were originally looking to do about 7,000 units, and you've seen about 645 units. When you start to look at that, I don't want to say disconnect, but dichotomy. What do you think, outside of the multitude of recessions in the past 40 years, but is there anything now that's kind of slowing that down, or what are you guys doing to increase the housing now?
I just think that it's there, because of our natural beauty, there's a lot of topographical challenges. And I think that part of it may have been that our development maybe got a little bit ahead of the value that it was going to provide, because the cost of moving that dirt to make these sites, gradable, to make them buildable, right? There's a lot of grading that has to happen, a lot of cost that goes up front. And so part of it may have been that that projects didn't pencil out. The other component is that we did have councils in the past that were very anti-growth, and there were areas of development that ended up in a neighboring city that originally were slated to be in our city. They weren't unincorporated, and they ended up incorporating into that neighboring city. and those have developed. And it's because they had the growth mindset that maybe we didn't have back then. Some of our own decisions in the past probably contributed to that, and I think now we're at a point where that mindset has shifted even in the last 10, 15 years, and as a result, we did start to see that development for the first time that we didn't see before. And so I think now that that has come and the marketplace has seen that they can be successful here, because when we did finally go to market with those first 600 and so units, those were bought up very, very quickly because we're affordable out here still. We're still a little bit closer to the job centers than our neighbors are. We're at the, kind of the northern slash western end of the San Gorgonio Pass. And yet, the city to our east has developed, and that's because they had that growth mindset. So now that we have that, I think that the market will react to it. And we've also now had some proof that, the market can work in our city. So I think that's the shift that was needed. There was one of the delays was a, a developer of that original one that had the 633 homes. For future phases, they wanted to change the timing of that. So we had to go through that process, get that approved. That's been approved now. We have some challenges with development closer to the freeway that project's relying on for public infrastructure. A developer went bankrupt on that. Some of it's been, I hate to say it, but it's been a little bit bad luck also, but at least we have those lined up ready to go. We're trying to take the steps to make sure that we can facilitate those public improvements being built and ultimately serve that development and get them going. And I think so they're phased correctly now. We're at a point where we're trying to get that public infrastructure, at least try to contribute to that infrastructure being built that can then reach that project. And then once that happens, they're going to go gangbusters, and I think they're going to do very, very well. And then a development to the north, they're currently going under re-entitlement. There's an industrial component with that project that, again, we're trying to negotiate the maximum benefit that we can for the city, while understanding that we don't want to overpromise or have the developer overpromise and they can't deliver. Then there's nothing for anybody, right? We want to make sure that we maximize our benefit without pushing too hard and making it undevelopable. And then we end up in the same situation where we've been in for the last 35 years. So once we get through those processes, I think we're really going to start to see that growth start to kick up again.
Wow. And for our viewers, you can kind of see the balancing act that it takes to lead a city. One of the things I kept hearing is you were thinking about how the developers see it and what they need, and then you guys have don't want to overpromise certain things, and then there was somebody that went bankrupt. So it's like that. Um, that balance is so important, and it's not sometimes like, I mean, you hear about it. It's the developer versus the municipality. In the perfect world, it's a partnership of sorts and building together. And it sounds like you've been able to be a true partner, especially to that one development that then had to change some times and change some scope, and you were able to be a partner. Uh, how
Right.
does how do you balance that? What is something that you've seen has been successful to encourage that partnership?
Well, I think it's just communication, right? I think that it's understanding that developers, what they want more than anything is predictability. That's really what they need. They want to be able to, they're willing to do more if you can make it more predictable for them and more stable for them. Because that's what their capital partners are relying on, right? So it's compromising and it's partnering with them without selling out to them. I don't want members of the general public to think that means you have to sell out to the developers. That's not what that means at all. But at the end of the day, yes, they are in it to make money and they're trying to maximize a profit. But that doesn't mean that, we just have to be sellouts to them either. We still need to demand the public services that we need. And they understand that. At the end of the day, they understand that because they know the one leverage we always have with them is we can say no. We can say no to their project. And that's very powerful. But at the same time, even if we say yes, if we don't, if we're being unrealistic about what they're trying to promise and they just they get desperate and they say yes to everything, then you end up with nothing. And then you don't get any of those benefits that you negotiated. So they're all ends up being a facade. So you have to be realistic, understanding, you have to understand the math that they're dealing with on their end. whether it's building infrastructure or all the grading operations. A lot of developers in a major development, they're going to have to put nine figures in before they start bringing a dollar in. They're going to have to spend over $100 million before they make any money back. And so that's a huge amount of money, right? But then the backside of that is a lot of value for them. Well, that value then translates to value for the city as well, because that's how the revenue is calculated, right? When you talk about property tax, it's all about valuation. Well, the more valuable their project, the more tax revenue that ends up coming to the city to be able to provide those services. And again, it's not just to provide services just to that development and they get all the perks of it. It's trying to negotiate something that's not only beneficial for those future residents, but also beneficial for the people that are here today. Because if it's at their expense, it's also not worth it for us, right? And then we're worse off than we were before. So we have to do the math. They have to do the math. You have to take a very pragmatic approach. And if they see that you have that business mindset at the same time, and they see you're passionate about your community and making sure that their interests are taken care of, but also you're being fair about it, and you try to see it from their perspective. It's not just saying, "Oh, there's developers; they're just greedy, and they're this, that, and the other." No, yes, they're trying to make money, but at the end of the day, if they can't build their project, they're making not they're not going to make anything. They've spent a lot of money just getting to that approval, so they have a vested interest in getting approval, right? So we have to make sure that we get what we want and understand what they need to be able to successfully build their project. So it's just, again, having that mindset of not only what the community needs, but also what's practical, and understanding that. And if you don't understand that, you can't negotiate that, it weakens your negotiating position, I think, ultimately. And so it's just a matter of trying to view it from both sides, and what would a reasonable person expect, and working from that mindset. You have to be very pragmatic about it. You can't just be one-sided about it. And I guess that's the best way I could put it.
Yeah, I think that's so important. The empathy that you have to understand that there's somebody on the other side of that has probably invested a lot of resources, time, and wants to make this happen. But then you need them to have the same empathy. It's somebody on the other side that is trying to give where they can, but they have to be great stewards of taxpayers' dollars and the stewards of their community. So I think that communication that you said is very important. One thing I was definitely it kind of brought to my attention is how are you, I guess, balancing that? Like, what are you kind of creating your own pro forma? Are you trying to work with them to look at their pro forma to understand where that balance and that give and take is? Because I mean, I've seen just with my different roles that I've had in the past where people were literally speaking past each other, almost saying the same thing, but not understanding that they're saying the same thing. So how are you kind of bridging that gap through the communication?
Well, I work a lot with my planning team and my engineering team to look at those things. The engineers, they have a pretty good idea of how much infrastructure costs they can do those estimates. So we try to create estimates of what we anticipate their costs are going to be. We know what the development impact fees are, so we can calculate those. And so I try to look at, okay, what are the things that we can, within reason, figure out what they're going to pay for. So I guess it would be like a little bit of trying to create a pro forma. They're not going to obviously share with that. As much as I want to work with them and be reasonable and rational with them, I also don't expect them to give me their trade secrets either. I don't think it would be in their best interest to do so. I don't really want to trust the numbers, and it's not about, are they going to lie to me? Well, yeah, they might actually. We have ways that we can look at it and go, okay, this makes sense. This does not. This is going to maybe we're asking for too much here, but what's our priority? What's more important to us? Where can we kind of dial back a little bit with that within reason? And what do we need to build? So like, and you can haggle over like traffic studies and traffic counts and things like that. And we're saying, okay, well, if we agree with you here and you can scientifically show it to us, that's always the case, right? If it's just in complete BS, then it doesn't matter, right? But if we can go like, okay, yeah, I can see how this makes sense. Where can then we make up the gap that we believe that we need to bridge in other areas, right? So we try to get creative about how timing of things. And that's a big thing too. Sometimes it's not about the amount of the benefit, it's the timing of the benefit and understanding how much money they're going to put up front, when they're going to start making money, at what points do those things happen, how much are they going to make back, what's their break even points. We try to do a lot of that figuring out on our end so that we make sure we can negotiate. Okay, we know they have room here, here, and here. Let's push in those areas. And also understanding what are the community concerns going to be? What are the benefits that we can bring in for our community that's going to offset those concerns? So when you talk about like warehouses, for example, truck traffic, pollution, things like that. So it's about where those things are cited. It's about how, the setbacks and things like that. It's also about maybe even things like commercial enforcement, making sure that we have, number one, really good truck routes established in our city. And number two, maybe the developer pays to have that enforcement done. So it gives some assurance to the community that they're not going to have just trucks driving all through their cities. They're going to be very specific areas. It's going to be very predictable. And those truck drivers are going to know that we're going to be enforcing it. And it's because those developers are paying for those costs for us to enforce it. So it's just those kind of things that you try to compromise on. And again, it is a kind of a guessing game in terms of what is their end value going to be, so we can predict how much tax revenue would come in. What's our benefit or base benefit there? And then you can kind of back into how much they're going to make on the back end of the project when all is said and done. And then trying to figure out, okay, what's the timing of that? What's their break even point, so that we can understand their negotiating side better, so that then we can use that to maximize and strategize where we push and where we compromise.
That makes a ton of sense. And I think it's so smart that you are doing those calculations ahead of time, even to the level of you understanding the cycle. A dollar today sometimes better than a dollar tomorrow. A dollar pre-approval is better than a dollar after approval sometimes. So yeah, I think that's just the level of thoughtfulness that you appreciate the process is, I know, appreciated on the developer side, and the way that you're really ironing out the benefits and the causes for concerns of your community, even down to where the trucks are going to be moving, I think is very much appreciated by your community. So with that, I definitely want to let you off the hot seat. I appreciate you being there. So this next segment is going to be a little more fun, a little more off the cuff. So these are our last chance games, and that comes from improv. So I just think of a quick yes and whatever is on the top of your mind, just let it fly. I'm going to ask 3 questions, and then you just say the first answer. And then at the end of the third question, I'll circle back, and then we can go through and you can give an explanation. You can strike it from the record, whatever makes the most sense for you there. So I'll read the first one. What policy looks good on paper but is nearly impossible to implement in real life?
Build all the infrastructure before any development happens.
There it is. Site ready. What role do you not have on staff that if you were able to hire tomorrow would instantly create a benefit?
Somebody focus on economic development.
And this is a two-parter, and then we're going to circle back to the other answers. What tasks do you think AI could help you with in your day-to-day? And what tasks can AI never help you with in your day-to-day?
They can help. It already helps me writing staff reports and doing analysis, but I don't think it can never replicate the human element of things and the qualitative aspects of the job.
Okay. So the policy that looks good on paper, build all the infrastructure before development. Could you explain that for me, please?
So that's the biggest complaint a lot of people have. It's like, you built all these homes, as if we built them, right? You build all these homes, you build all these things without building the interchange, that $80 million interchange first. So they don't understand. There is sometimes a 10-year process when it comes to CalPERS or not CalPERS, Caltrans. CalPERS is a whole other issue. But Caltrans and going through their process of building interchanges, right? And that's the biggest challenge we have in our city. And so everyone wants the developer to put that money out. Well, as we just talked about in the previous segment, Developers have to put a tremendous amount of money out before they make any money back, even dollar one, much less a break even. And so if you're adding time, if you're adding an additional 10 years to that time where they're going to start bringing money in, plus another maybe 70, $80 million in cost for something that may or may not happen, the risk then ends up being too high. And people will say, well, that's fine. Then we just won't have development. But okay, where are your kids going to live? You're asking for us to get these restaurants. You're asking us to enhance services. You're asking us to fix the roads. Where's that money going to come from? It's coming from development. And so that's where the push and shove is. And yes, in an ideal world, absolutely, I 100% agree. The infrastructure should all be put in before one house is put in or one store is put in. But it just doesn't work realistically. It doesn't work in reality. Can you imagine that you say, okay, you're going to buy a house, but you have to pay for everything up front before you move. You have to buy it cash. And yes, you can pay for it over time, but you can't move in until then. So you can buy this house today, but you can't move in for 10 to 12 years. No one's going to go for that, right? It's kind of the same philosophy here. Maybe it's not the perfect analogy, but it's just you cannot expect that to, happen. Again, we started our process before that developer did start building, several years before that. It's just that this red tape takes so long that sometimes it's just not reality to that to happen. It's frustrating. I understand why it's frustrating, but it's just something that is unrealistic.
Yeah, that was a big one, and I appreciate how you broke that down. And I like the analogy, just telling people the trade-offs and the time commitments that come with the money and when it's outlaid. So I appreciate that. And then what role on staff? Economic development. I think based on some of the strategic priorities that makes sense. But if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think our council nowadays, we had a couple of new council members come in, and they're seeing other major retailers going to neighboring cities, and I congratulate them for that. But obviously, they would like to see those here, and so I think that's one area that we haven't really been able to be proactive in. We're a very small staff here in Calimesa. We do a good job with what we have. But I think that because of that, we have to be a little more reactive because we just can't be as proactive. And I think economic development is very much a proactive area, going out and making those contacts, being very intentional about those things. And as a city manager in a small city, I wear a lot of different hats, just like all of our staff does. And so it's one of those things that as much as I try to focus on it, there's so many other things that take my attention and take my time that I can't spend on it as much time as on it as I would like to myself. Obviously, I think a city manager and your planning folks do need to be involved with that. But having somebody that can be out there pounding the pavement, calling brokers, working with our development community, figuring out what tools we need to really attract those and put us on the map. That's what we need. And because that's one of the biggest things that people ask. We want this, we want that. No, the city doesn't build those things, but can we create an environment where we facilitate those things? Absolutely. And I think that's the role that I'd like to be able to fill, because that will unlock more tax revenue that will allow us to do even more things and be more proactive in other areas. But I think that until we're more proactive in that area, it's going to be really hard to unlock those other areas.
Makes a ton of sense, and based on the focus of where you guys are going, and it sounds like that would be very important and very impactful. Now shifting to AI, it sounds like it's helping a little bit now, but there's a couple things that it can't help with.
Yeah, so it doesn't pick up the human emotion part of it, and so much of this, we're in public service, we're in the people business, right? People always say government doesn't produce things. It's like, well, does a doctor produce things? Does a lawyer produce things? They're providing a service, right? They don't build something, but they provide an invaluable service. And I see that that's what we do too. A lot of our costs go into personnel, right? Whether it's fire, police, public works, all those are done by people. And so that's something that AI can't replicate. Understanding why the community feels the way they do about a certain thing and having empathy. I can create a staff report. I can conduct analysis. I can do a lot of quantitative stuff with AI. but I can't replace that conversation with that resident to reassure them that yes, we do hear their concerns and we do want to try to do what we can to help. Again, understanding what our constraints are, explaining what our constraints are, and understanding how we need to explain those things. That's something that I don't know if AI will ever be able to replicate. I was at the Cal Cities city manager conference earlier this year, and there was a session on whether AI can replace the city manager. And it was an interesting session and an interesting conversation because there is a lot of public perception is that we just kind of push papers around and kind of direct things. But again, it's that human element, and it's that you know those things, those human intuition things that a machine, I don't know if you could ever teach a machine to truly have all of those qualities and understand council dynamics and understand community dynamics and working with businesses and working with residents and working with kids and the next generation. Just something that it can't replicate. And so that's where I think that it'll always fall short. And that's why this will always be a people business and it'll always be a human business because of that.
That. And I think it's very important to that, or I hope that the human element is always just kept paramount in public service because that is what it is. It's you're serving the public. And I even think when I have an issue and I need a customer service thing and I'm calling on the phone, I am pressing zero immediately because I do not want to talk to an automated. I want somebody to, at the very least, even if it can't be fixed, to see me, hear me, and commiserate as best they can. So I hope that we keep that human element in there. Because yeah, I don't want my city manager to be a robot.
Right. Can you imagine every time when you have those automated prompts, and how often does it say, I don't understand what you're asking for? But if a human heard what I was asking for, they know what I'm asking for.
Mhm.
So I don't know if we'll ever get around that.
Yeah, one thing this now I'm just on an aside, but one thing I heard is humans are really great at the gray area of things, and that's where AI just isn't as good, at least yet. And a lot of the things in public service exist in that gray area. So
Yes, absolutely.
but no, I enjoyed that. So I have a couple more questions before we get into the final part where I'm giving away free money. So we'll ask these three first thing to your head, and then we'll circle back like we just did. So, what is the hardest truth you wish residents knew about timelines and trade offs?
There's always more to it than you actually think.
Okay, okay, I like that. What is the most common hidden development constraint? Utilities, ownership, zoning, money, or politics?
Wow. In my experience, it's been ownership.
Okay. And then what is the biggest long-term risk that you can't fully address in a 2 to 4 year election cycle?
Having all the parks that you want.
Okay, nice. Okay, so let's circle back. So the residents' truth about trade-offs. You were saying that you can't have it all. Is that it?
Yeah, well, you
Or
can't
there's always a
there's
part that
always
you
more
don't know?
something there's something
Yeah.
always more to it than they think. So, one of the biggest hidden constraints in the public sector is risk management, right? And so there's a lot of that goes into that, whether it's, having to work within the Constitution or, liability risks of things. It's like, well, just go out and do this. I'll give you an example. We have an interchange that we're going to be, that I talked about earlier. That's $80 million that we're getting close to final design with, which we've been working on for many, many years. But there was some inner improvements that were done by a developer on the other side of the freeway in unincorporated county areas, and they added a traffic signal. But they didn't add was a right turn lane that would benefit our residents. They basically were kind of more centrally focused on the other side of the freeway where their industrial development was. And so the question we always get is, well, why can't you just add a right turn lane? It's like, well, number one, it's in Caltrans right of way. So we can't go out there. If I sent my crew out there to go repaint stripes, then CHP would be out there and arresting them because they're working illegally in the right of way. It takes a minimum of a year to get an encroachment permit from Caltrans because of various things. Again, because of risk management. But also, what people don't think about is if you just go out and just, because there was a guy that told me recently, I could go out there over the weekend and just go paint some lines on the road. Well, if you modify a intersection and an accident happens at that intersection, whether or not it had anything to do with that striping at all, if you modified it without a proper traffic study, you're going to be liable for any accident that happens in that intersection. If the city is named in a lawsuit, which they almost inevitably are, the state would be named, the city would be named. Inevitably, you're going to have a situation where you end up having it, you end up in a courtroom and said, okay, who installed this? What study told you this justified this design? Was this design engineering? Did you guys properly engineer this? If the answer is no, boom, you pay. And I've heard of cities that the timing on their yellow light was a tenth of a second off. An accident happened. It wasn't because of that yellow light, by the way, but they looked at the timing sheets and noticed that the signal was not properly calibrated. The city should have known that it wasn't properly calibrated, and they ended up paying over $10 million on that accident for a tenth of a second. So those are the kind of risk restraints that we are under and that we have to be mindful of, because we're working with taxpayer money. Because that $10 million, guess what? Ultimately, that comes from taxpayers, right? So those are the kind of things that we always have to weigh. And so that's why when people think, oh, bureaucracy, red tape, things take so long, that's why. Because the long-term effect of that is we're minimizing risk and protecting taxpayer money.
Wow. Yeah. It's always a little bit more than we're thinking as residents sometimes. And then the biggest constraint to development, you said ownership. Could you elaborate there, please?
I think that all the things you mentioned could be, depending on the development, could be the biggest constraint. I think it really is very, very dependent on what someone's trying to do. No development two developments look exactly the same. Just the issue that we're having right now, the biggest constraint I've seen, and this is not necessarily a thing that I've seen at the city I'm at, but the city I was previously at, there was a mall. It was a dated mall. And so it's prime for redevelopment. And there's a lot of ideas of what to do with that mall. But the biggest constraint is you had multiple ownership of this site. So unless someone was able to cobble all that together for one comprehensive development, redeveloping that area is going to be almost impossible, because you have an old time family that owns the site where the Sears store was, that's attached to the mall. They were on a 99-year lease. Sears, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of out, but what they are right now is basically a land company now. They still have these very favorable leases, and what they'll do is they'll turn around and rent that space out at a profit. And so because they signed these 99-year leases back in the 60s, well, if that thing's still making money, they're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to be interested in selling. So trying to assemble that to be able to really make a project move is very, very challenging. And so that's one of the biggest constraints on development, and in particular redevelopment, is just fragmented ownership. And so that's why I think that can ultimately be one of the biggest challenges with development.
A ton of sense. And then the long-term thing that can't be fixed in a 2 to 4 year cycle. And this was, I believe, all the parts. You don't have all the parts. Could you elaborate on that?
So, I meant parks with a K.
Parks.
Yeah. So, everyone wants to have more parks, and they go, we can have one here, we can have one there. Any piece of open land, they just assume, oh, that's open space, you can build a park there. Well, not if it's privately owned and everything has zoning on it. And so, even a small, we just recently opened an expansion of an existing park. I mean, it took us 4 years to just get that park done. It was only a couple of acres. And so it's land acquisition, site development, if you have to acquire land, you have to buy it at its highest and best use. You can't just say, well, we're going to value it as if it's, parkland to begin with. No, if it's zone commercial or if it's zone residential, you have to pay for the park base. You have to pay for that space based on that price. There's a lot of money goes on, because sometimes people will run on, I want parks. I want new parks. A person in a 4-year election cycle, if they say, I'm going to build more parks, they're not going to get it done. It's just not going to happen. It's impossible. So to me, a lot of things are long term, But that's one I've heard people run on before is we don't have enough parks. I'm going to build parks. And it just doesn't happen that quickly.
So the ton of sense. Yeah, that's just a serious undertaking, and election cycles come up pretty quick. So I promised for this last question, I'd give you some free money. So think you have all the staff you need, all the money you need, anything and everything, all the studies are done and taken care of. So all the capital and staff for an entire year, what would be the one challenge or initiative that you would tackle?
When I interviewed for this position, one of the things that struck me as having a lot of potential is our downtown area. So we have about between a half mile and a mile strip on Calimesa Boulevard in the older part of town that has so much potential. And I would want to design and do a lot of redevelopment on that site, repave it, landscaping, streetscapes, make it more walkable, facade improvements for businesses, building maybe a veterans park. We have a brand new library along it, and so it looks great. But unfortunately, a lot of things are old around it, so we want to complement that with maybe an adjacent park. And we have a historic building that we want to convert into maybe a historic museum for the city. That's what I would do. Is I think it would be a big draw for us, and it would be very attractive, and it would be something that our residents could be proud of. So if I could do that, and again, obviously, with the caveat that the city manager has that authority because that's the city council, right? But if I had the authority, that would be what I would do because I really believe that there's so much potential there. And I think it would be a great asset for our community and something that would really be able to bring our tale of two cities, like when I talk about, bring a place for them to actually gather and be together.
Love that community being together. That is so important, and I love that. With all the money in the world, that would be the thing you would facilitate. So Will, before we close out, do you have any final words to our viewers or for members in the community?
Well, I will do a shameless plug. I invite people to check out my podcast, the Calimesa Insider. It is, focused on Calimesa, but I do a lot of shows about how government works, and maybe sometimes it's a little bit specific to California in terms of tax structure and things like that. But really, my goal with the podcast is to educate the public on how government works and how local government works. I think sometimes too often we see people commingle what's happening at the state and federal level to what happens at the local level. But if you think about it, you pay taxes, right? You pay property taxes, you pay sales taxes. Those are some of those dollars are what stay local. And every day you're out, you'll see exactly what that money is paying for. As soon as you walk out to the street, you see that sidewalk, you see that street, you look maybe down the road, you see a park, you see a school near you. That's your tax money in action. You see that cop drive by to make sure things are safe. You see that fire truck going to a call. You're seeing your tax dollars at work more so than anywhere else. You could go days without seeing what your federal money does. You could go days without seeing what your state money does. But you'll never go a day without seeing what your local government does. And so my goal with the podcast is to really take the mystery out of how we operate at City Hall and show just how connected and how close we are to the community.
That will. And make sure you guys go check out. It is the Calimesa Insider. Will, where can we find the podcast?
That can be found at calimesa.gov/podcast.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have today. I'm your host, Jonathan Mason, and I was joined with Will, who is the city manager of Calimesa, California. Thank you guys so much to all the viewers. We appreciate you and have a great day.